Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Sea Lord Aislinn in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, the next legendary lord for the High Elves that will be coming alongside Tides of Torment. What I have here is Cataph's Sea Patrol mod that adds Aislinn, makes Katika a playable faction, and gives a whole bunch of other benefits. Though I think the mod is more useful to play together with other mods for the High Elves, because on its own it's certainly lacking in terms of some of the unique mechanics that would really fit Aislinn as a legendary lord. And on that point, based on what Creative Assembly stated in their video, he is going to have a unique mechanic based, I guess, on preemptive wars, likely some mission-based campaign one way or another. So anyway, looking at Aislinn in the mod and thinking about how Creative Assembly could do him, how they will do him. In terms of faction effects, in this case it's bugged out, the tooltip's bugged out, the faction effects are working, but you get a benefit in terms of attrition at sea, you get an experience benefit at sea, you get higher level archmages and mages in certain schools of magic, so Lore of Heavens and Lore of Shadows. Of course, we're gonna have Lore of Mist with the new mage, and I imagine it might even end up applying to archmages. Maybe, maybe not. Generally speaking, I do prefer to use magic on heroes as opposed to lords because I want my lords to get stuck into a melee. I want them to be useful from that perspective as opposed to using them for casting spells. But that's where I stand on that subject. Now, this mod does not have a new hero type or a school of magic attached to it. You do get those higher recruit ranks, but you do have regular magic available to you, regular high elf magic available to you. Makes me wonder if the Mist Mage that CA is adding, whether or not it will be a separate school of mages, and whether or not they are going to give you campaign movement range. Because High Elves do have casualty replenishment, they have scouting, they have training, but they are lacking in terms of campaign movement range, which I imagine would be very fitting for Aislinn's campaign in particular, but just in general fitting for the High Elves. Now, looking at Aislinn in the mod right here, we do get Phenomenal Tactician, which gives us ambush success chance, leadership, immune to high seas reef, and storm attrition. So the faction effect that reduces attrition is useful for your other armies. He's immune to high seas reef and storm attrition. He gets that campaign movement range, however, is very significant, because you can also get Seafarer if you're spending multiple turns at sea. So you are in a position where you can get a good amount of campaign movement range, especially because he has access to shipbuilding. He has an armor over here, physical resistance, more armor, all that. But if we look at his special skill line, or his skill line in general, he's getting an upkeep benefit for Ladder and Seaguard, melee defense, income from ports 1%. 1% is irrelevant. You know, sometimes I think a lot of modders do go in a very limited approach because they think, oh, it's like this campaign is going to play it for 100 turns. Anyway, you do get melee attack, missile damage for Ladder and Seaguard, as well as Eagle Claw bolt throwers and Swift Feather Riders. You do have a rock as a mount. You get stock, speed, Vanguard deployment for himself, and of course, and certain units. Outside of that, you get some melee benefits. He's pretty good in melee, or decently enough in melee. He even gets a Y Alliance of Crix benefit, melee attack, melee defense, upkeep for his army. He also gets recovery HP, as well as Berserk for Mertwims, as well as a Storm Dragon. So I guess Storm Dragons aren't just Meow Ying, they're an actual thing. Are they an actual thing on tabletop? I'm not quite sure. You also get this trait, which reduces your influence by 2, but gives you a significant income from looting and sacking settlements. And I haven't taken it here because in this case, my influence is limited. but obviously would be so. I think it's a decent enough skill line, but I do think CA can do better from that perspective. Maybe some faction-wide effects as opposed to just a bunch of Lord effects. I think, generally speaking, the best skill lines are the ones that give you faction-wide effects, because that can really make things interesting. Outside of that, you do get a couple of unique skills as well, in the sense that you have different red line skills, starting with hold the line, over there going loose, as well as getting a bunch of different benefits for the unique units, as well as some generic high elven units. So you get Sea Guard traditions, but you also have Bowmaster. And you also have Fleet Growth over here at the bottom through his blue skill line, because he does have shipbuilding. Not just for himself, because the mod also adds Sea Helms as a Lord choice. And I think that's, generally speaking, going to be expected. Sure, people have talked about the Anointed of Asuryan, but I think if you're going to add Aislinn, I think the generic Lord choice that they should go for should be the Sea Helm. It does beg the question of CA's decision with the Mist Mage, really, on that subject, because I think Sea Helms could have made sense from the perspective of a generic hero that would give us campaign movement range. But these lords in the mod do have shipbuilding. And this brings up an interesting point. We do have shipbuilding in this mod. We look at the Vampire Coast, we look at the Dark Elves. And we gotta talk about the Dark Elves. If Creative Assembly adds shipbuilding, a shipbuilding lord in the game, generic one, not just one tied to Aislinn, I think it's reasonably safe to say that it would make a lot of sense for Aislinn himself to have shipbuilding. That would make perfect sense. It would tie together very well with his character. The big question is whether or not High Elves should have a shipbuilding lord available. The reason why I bring that up, or maybe some special lords, they could go down the path of Vampire Coast, where you can only get a certain number of them. I think that number should be higher, because you do have the elementation of Vampire Coast. But what you do gain here are some benefits. Not as beneficial as Black Ark, because yes, you can recruit a bunch of different units, though not as many as Black Ark, which have the entire Dark Elven roster, as well as gaining various campaign benefits. So you can get a huge amount of campaign movement range with Aislinn over here, and I think that would fit his character very well. Like, at least at sea, having a bunch of campaign movement range at sea would make sense. But the problem is, when a bit of a balancing perspective, or rather how Dark Elves would be left behind, because Dark Elves do have Black Arcs, but consider this. Black Arcs have a long cooldown on the right, and they don't have global recruitment. High Elves do have global recruitment. So unless Creative Assembly is willing to change that, remove global recruitment, give them Horde armies, I think they need to consider, okay, if we give these guys global recruitment, what about the Dark Elves, right? The natural rivals in that. I think it makes sense for High Elves to have a focus on naval warfare, because for all the Black Arcs and the Vampire Coast, you look at Vampire Coast, you look at Dark Elves, they're raiders. Whereas High Elves, I think in the lore, have the strongest naval power, are the strongest overall naval power, and more traditional as a naval power. So I think shipbuilding makes sense for them, but then you gotta wonder about Vampire Coast, and you really gotta wonder about Dark Elves. But yeah, what you get with shipbuilding is being able to recruit a bunch of the units like Sea Guard, Sea Companies, Eagle Claw, Bolt Throwers, all that kind of stuff. Get more Horde army capacity, as well as a bunch of buffs. I mean, the argument could be that the Black Arcs do give far more significant benefits, especially in terms of the usable abilities, which should not be underestimated. I mean, you do have the Eagle Claw salvo. But that is a big point right here in terms of like the Black Arcs, the shipbuilding capability that they would have. I think it makes sense, and especially would make sense if it would allow the High Elves to traverse the seas better than other factions. But it does bring the question, like, you know, how other races would be. Basically, what I'm trying to say would have made a lot more sense if they had been doing Dark Elves at the same time as doing Slaanesh and High Elves. Just saying that right there wouldn't make a lot of sense, especially because apparently we're going to get some devoted to Slaanesh Dark Elves who are going to have range units, so they're going to have a crossbow option right there. Now, in terms of units that this mod adds compared to what Creative Assembly is going to add, well, what we do get by default, C Company. Actually, let's consider what CA is doing. So they revealed essentially 4 out of 5 units, because they mentioned Skycutters, but they also mentioned that there's going to be 2 variants of Skycutters. So one's going to have probably an Eagle Claw bolt thrower on it. The other one is just going to have archers on it. So those are the 2 versions we're going to get. So 2 units, variants, okay. Those are 2 units. Then we're going to have the 2 elemental units that they revealed in the video. And that just leaves 1 more unit. Now, what could they do with that 1 unit? Well, there's a couple of options, sure. They could go down the infantry route, or they could add merworms, which would be pretty interesting for them to add 3 single entities in a mod like that. Could happen, could work out. Hopefully it is interesting enough, but we've certainly seen Creative Assembly going down the path of like regular units being added as free content. So we look at Blood Knights, for instance, or Orc Spear Boys, and then the more interesting stuff, the single entity stuff, or the more unique units being added as DLC, because they do want people to buy DLC for the units in part. But that does bring up a question. Now, in this mod, what we don't have 2 versions of the Skycutters. What we do have is 1 version. The animations are a bit questionable, though they work surprisingly well. Basically, the rocks, the eagles, are animated. The actual Skycutters, the platform is just pretty static. Looks a bit derpy, I'm not gonna lie, but you know, I imagine CA can work on that animation situation or the size of the thing. But anyway, this is basically a flying Eagle Claw bolt thrower, and that is likely what we're going to get when Tides of Torment comes out. Which means that High Elves will go from a race that has very limited artillery to having some of the best artillery options in terms of battlefield flexibility, because while bolt throwers may end up still being limited, let me just put it like this. Mobile artillery piece is pretty powerful. A flying artillery piece can be pretty damn game-breaking. It allows you to hit... it allows you to go in, harass the enemy with the artillery while the battle is playing out. It gives you angles of attack, and that's just field battles. In sieges, it can be quite powerful. One of the reasons dwarves dominate so well is because gyrocopters and gyrobombers and thunder barges, of course, are flying units, artillery units, basically. And then you look at Cataph with skyjunks, similar situation like flying Hellstorm rocket batteries. So Skycutters, the bolt thrower version, I imagine it would probably be a tier 4 version, or tier 3 at least, for CA. That would be powerful. We don't have a bow version of the Skycutter. Instead, we get riders, so we get swift feather riders over there. So just high elves riding rocks. So more or less what the wood elves already have at the moment. And then yeah, you can't recruit every unit, and you also can't recruit these units on land unless you're in a settlement, because there's no stance to allow you to do so. So you can recruit at sea, you can recruit in a settlement. These kind of units right here, so just worth pointing out. But yeah, you get Modern Sea Rangers, which I think they exist on tabletop, but they're basically Rangers, right? So you do have that. You get Modern Sea Guard, recruitable, and then yeah, in this case I've unlocked Skycutters and basically the Hawk Riders. Later on, you can get, and that's many of the units that are available here. You do get merwims are at tier 4, and at tier 5 through shipbuilding, you get access to Silver Helm Marines. So basically, Silver Helms with a bow, decent armor, high brigands. Like C Company, kind of tier 1 version of Vlad and Sea Guard. I think they're better in range because there's, well, a bit better in range in some way. Though they have less armor, but they do have those silver shields. So that's one of the benefits. Rangers are, well, Rangers, suffice to say. Decent enough armor on these guys, though, of course, you know, archers with light armor. There's a whole discussion on that subject. Like Shadow Warriors and Shadow Walkers are still just, you know, the better option in certain ways, but equivalent, they're equivalent in that respect. Well, Shadow Walkers would be the better unit because of the poison attacks that they do have. And yeah, merworms, just a big single entity, a land-based dragon or sea-based dragon with regeneration. Pretty powerful, but also very, very expensive on that subject. I kind of think CA does need to consider how they make these single entities work, because generally speaking, a lot of these are overkill in a campaign and a battle, and it's just a lot better in a huge amount of situations to get more armies in your campaign. So I think that's a bit of a balancing discussion to be had on that subject from my perspective on that. But yeah, 2 versions of Skygutters that we're going to get from CA, 2 elementals, and I'm guessing the merworm, or maybe some infantry option. I'd be perfectly fine with either of those, honestly. I'm more interested in campaign mechanics and how those will work. But one of the things I think this mod does achieve to a certain extent is the idea that you do have that movement range. I think it should be higher for Aislinn, especially we should have missions all around the world, coastal missions. Give us that incentive. Maybe actually make a naval-based campaign work, which it doesn't right now for the Vampire Coast. And that's a different discussion, whether or not CA should improve the Vampire Coast. I mean, they improved the Tomb Kings and they improved the Lizardmen, so they can improve races in patches. And I do certainly think that the Vampire Coast does need that treatment. Research-wise, for instance, they need that treatment, some mechanics update, etc. But I think it's worth looking at these kind of things because we know CA does tend to quote-unquote copy or steal, if you will. Though they do give credit, but they do tend to take ideas from mods and add them into the game. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're taking a look at this mod in particular and thinking, okay, this is what this mod does, what ideas would work for us, what wouldn't work for us. It would not be surprising if that ended up being the case for CA themselves. Though, interestingly enough, in this mod, he has a rock, but he doesn't have a skycutter, whereas CA has announced that in Tides of Torment, Aislinn is going to have a skycutter mount. And it's going to be a mount in general for... I mean, you can get the skycutter available for your Sea Helms. But I'm guessing that whatever Lord we're going to get, and I would expect a Sea Helm, that Lord is probably going to get a skycutter mount as well, with regards to, like, you know, just missiles running. Like the Sea Helm right here, they're a hybrid Lord, so kind of like a princess, really, but just different focus in terms of, like, in terms of mounts, because, like, when you look at the princess, she can get the dragon. She can be pretty devastating on dragon. You don't get the dragon with the Sea Helm. So there's downsides, but there's also benefits because of the shipbuilding. Though, speaking about shipbuilding, one of the problems that you do have with this mod is High Elves have the negative trait system in the game, and the way that they did it here is like they reduce fleet growth by 20 in this case. And your default fleet growth is 10, so you're actually in negative fleet growth, so you can't grow. You'll need to spend influence to get these lords to have any access to higher level ships. Otherwise, they're just basically a generic lord with, you know, just a bit of recruitment available to them, like just a very, very limited level. Like, I think that entire negative trait system that CA has for the High Elves right now should just be completely removed from the game. I mean, it's one thing to have heroes and lords with better traits, okay, but I think influence lords, heroes do need to be getting an overhaul. They did a major overhaul for a lot of different traits, and I hope they do that with Tides of Torment for specific High Elf traits. If anything, just nerf Administrator, really, because it's still a bloody ridiculous system. Instant construction, free construction that you can get, like, yeah, that really needs to be changed one way or another. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.